Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are doing the second Sci-Friday, and this time it is The Stars Within by Lena, Allison, Knight. Put that up here. This is the second of the six quarterfinalists for SPSFC for my team, and so like I said in the first one, planning on doing one of these every week leading up to and just kind of talking about each one, highlighting how everything went. So started off pretty strong with Melody. I really enjoyed that one. And this was another one where the beginning had me pretty interested. So it sets up our main character who is a psionic and so has powerful psychic abilities, basically, including telekinesis, and is able to read people's minds and like affect them with telepathy in that way, and is basically a conscripted soldier for this really, really big, like, multi-galactic corporation, and is sent in when things aren't going well on the planets. It's kind of explained early on, they basically will go to planets and they will kind of sucker the inhabitants into deals where, like, they build crappy infrastructure for them, and in return they get all of, like, anything valuable, minerals, that kind of thing, forever. And so it's pretty common that once people kind of realize what's happening, they can revolt, that kind of thing, and then they send the soldiers in, including the psionics. So started out pretty interesting, and I was interested to continue, but I felt like the story just kind of lost its way a little bit from that point. We kind of started moving around really quickly, glossing over a lot of the things that I found interesting, and then just kind of including some things that felt really out of place for me. There were, in kind of the middle, there were several scenes where it just felt very mundane, normal, everyday, like in our world kind of things that were happening, things that just seemed like, oh, really, on this completely different planet, they just do the same kind of thing people would do today on Earth, even though this is a really advanced society, and that sort of thing. So I felt like that was a little odd, and there were also some other things that were just mentioned, were like old, really like basic things that I struggled to believe were still going to be around. Like a couple of different times, a mop and bucket are referenced, and I feel like that's probably not the most efficient way to clean something in this very futuristic, technologically advanced society. So just things like that where it kind of pulled me out. Scenes that just felt like they didn't quite fit the setting, and so I was a little bit kind of more in the middle here. It does still definitely do some interesting things, and it has, for a bit of it, has kind of a slightly darker than you'd probably normally see in like a YA dystopian type of thing. I definitely think if you're into that kind of thing, like YA dystopian, this is definitely better than some of that kind of stuff I've read. I usually hate that stuff, and I did not hate this book. So I do think there are some positives there with the story that it's telling, and it's written well. It's written well. It's just, I think, not really necessarily my kind of story as much, and I still was genuinely invested. We didn't learn a ton about like the psionic abilities. It is the first book in a series. I assume there'll be a lot more of that coming. But kind of seeing some of the different things, what were being done. The other issue I kind of ran into is it just felt like after a while we were just kind of throwing in tropes that didn't necessarily fit. The book seems like it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. And what I mean by that is I explained kind of the first part of the plot. Things change a lot for the next section after that, and then we keep just kind of, in each section, it seems like it's a new kind of story in some ways, and I think that's something that it could potentially work, but I don't really feel that it did all that well in this scenario, where it just was kind of jarring when things kept changing. There were just different elements where it's like, oh, this feels like this is out of this kind of movie, or oh, now we're doing this kind of thing that's like this, and kind of moving it all together in a way that I didn't find to work super well. So I was a bit middling, and I do have to say that, fortunately, the ending of this one kind of disappointed me as well. It just sort of ended. It's definitely intending to lead into the second book, but it felt like we kind of resolved some things way before the end of the book, and then it felt like there was just kind of an additional plot line added to add length, and then that was just kind of like, well, we're done with this, let's move on to book 2. And so I didn't feel like it really just kind of didn't bring it together for me. And this is one of those books where I probably would have been a little more middling on it anyway, because it's just not fully my kind of thing. But the ending really didn't pull things together for me, and instead just made me like, okay, whatever. There were some choices too people made where they just seemed to immediately be like, yeah, I'm gonna do this. And I'm like, why would you do that? What are your motivations? I do not understand. And so I think some of it was just the main character was developed pretty well, but most of the other characters, and we don't spend a ton of time with other characters, but the other side characters that are important, I don't feel like we really got a lot of development, and so it made it so that I just don't really know how to feel about the choices they're making, and they end up just seeming like I don't see why just some random person would do this, and that's kind of how they felt as some random person for me. So overall, like I said, this one did not work out too well for me. Not a bad book, and it is well written. I definitely think, like I said, if you are into kind of like dystopian YA type stuff, this is a little bit darker than that, so I appreciated that it didn't really feel super YA in that regard. It feels kind of like maybe just slightly branching off. We're just going to go make it a little bit more adult themed. The characters aren't teenagers either, even though it does that thing that I always kind of hate, where it's like, our characters are adults, but they're going to act like teenagers, and so it just still gives you that feeling of teenagers, which I'm like, eh. But it's a bit more adult, I would say, than some other things. Even some other books that are supposed to be adult that I've said feel extremely YA. I didn't think this felt extremely YA. There were definitely some of those elements in there, is somewhat in the story, but some of the main character especially I feel like was developed pretty well. So I think that it at least did work out. And like I said, if you like that kind of thing, I think this would probably work pretty well for you. It's just not necessarily something I'm a huge fan of, so it didn't work all that well for me. But overall, an interesting read, and I am still really excited to continue with the SPSFC reads and see what we have next. I know there's a super YA one in there that I'm also not going to probably like, although it was also well written, so, I'll read it and talk about it, but I feel like it's just kind of one of those things where it's, I get a book that I know is not really my style. I try to talk about the positives and the negatives too. This one, besides not being my style, I had some issues with, but overall was well written, but excited to see what else we have for our quarter finalists and keep moving on with SPSFC. But those are really my thoughts on The Stars Within by Lena, Allison. Let me know in the comments if you have read this one or what your thoughts are on it too. I'd be curious because, like I said, I feel like a lot of people would enjoy this a lot more than I did. It just was probably in some ways just not really my kind of thing, and so that, obviously I'm going to enjoy it a little bit less, but I would definitely be curious on other thoughts, or if the way I described it does still have you interested in the book too. Always interesting to hear that kind of thing, so let me know. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, any books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.